Hitler became chancellor in 1933, but that was just the beginning. In the next 3 years, he transformed Germany from a democracy into a terrifying dictatorship. And no one stopped him. During this phase, Hitler made moves that were clear red flags for the world. But Europe stayed silent. Could they have stopped him in time? What if I told you that between 1933 and 1936, there were at least 5 moments when the world could have prevented World War II? 5 moments when Hitler was vulnerable, when even his own generals doubted him, when one decisive action could have changed history forever. This isn't just the story of how a dictator consolidated power. It's the story of how the world ignored every warning and handed Hitler the confidence to plunge civilization into its darkest chapter. These were Hitler's secret years, the hidden transformation that made World War II inevitable. And the most terrifying part? Every step was visible. Every red flag was raised. Every chance to stop him was right there. Our story begins with flames in the heart of Berlin. And with a lie so big, it gave Hitler the legal right to destroy German democracy forever. February 27, 1933, 9:14 p.m. The German Parliament building erupted in flames that could be seen across Berlin. Within minutes, police arrested a half-naked Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe at the scene. But here's what's truly chilling. Hitler arrived at the Reichstag faster than the fire department. This is a God-given signal. Hitler declared, his eyes gleaming not with shock, but with opportunity. The communists have begun their revolution. By morning, Hitler had convinced the aging President Hindenburg to sign the decree for the protection of people and state. With a single signature, every civil liberty in Germany vanished. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, all suspended indefinitely under emergency powers. But Hitler wasn't finished. He needed more than emergency powers. He needed legal dictatorship. On March 23, 1933, the German parliament met in the Kroll Opera House. The Reichstag building was still too damaged to use. How convenient. Hitler proposed the Enabling Act, a law that gave his government the power to pass any law without parliamentary approval. Democracy would literally vote itself out of existence. The vote was 444 in favor, 94 against. Only the Social Democrats had the courage to vote no. The communists were already in jail or hiding. In one afternoon, the German parliament handed Hitler the legal authority to rule as a dictator. Many historians today still debate who really started the Reichstag fire. The Nazi evidence against van der Lubbe was suspiciously convenient. The speed of Hitler's response was remarkably well prepared. Could this have been a self-orchestrated drama to justify dictatorship? What we know for certain is this. Hitler had just pulled off the perfect political manipulation. He had used a crisis, real or manufactured, to gain legal powers that would let him destroy every institution that could oppose him. With the Enabling Act in hand, Hitler moved with surgical precision. First target, political opposition. By July 1933, every political party in Germany except the Nazis was banned. The Social Democrats, who had courageously voted against the Enabling Act, were declared enemies of the Reich state. Communist leaders were already in concentration camps, but Hitler understood something that many dictators miss. Controlling politics isn't enough. You have to control society itself. May 2nd, 1933, at 10 a.m. sharp, Nazi stormtroopers simultaneously raided every trade union office across Germany. Union leaders were arrested, union funds were seized, and millions of German workers woke up to discover their organizations had vanished overnight. In their place, Hitler created the German Labor Front, a Nazi-controlled organization that promised workers strength through joy, while stripping away their right to strike, bargain, or protest. Next came the press. Independent newspapers were shut down or taken over. Editors were replaced with Nazi loyalists. Within months, every German citizen was reading the same stories, hearing the same propaganda, thinking the same thoughts. But perhaps the most insidious transformation was happening in Germany's schools. Hitler's bureaucracy rewrote textbooks from the ground up. Mathematics problems asked. students to calculate the cost of caring for disabled people. Biology classes taught racial hierarchy as scientific fact. History lessons painted Germany as a victim destined for greatness. Even science had to pass. Through the Nazi ideology filter, physics was divided into German physics and Jewish physics, with Einstein's theories rejected not for being wrong, but for being created by a Jewish mind. This process had a name, Gleichschaltung, meaning coordination or bringing into line. But it was really about something much more sinister, the systematic erasure of independent thought from an entire nation. Within 18 months, Hitler had achieved what seemed impossible. Germany, a country with a rich tradition of intellectual freedom and democratic debate, had become a nation where every voice sang in harmony, because every other voice had been silenced. June 30th, 1934, 6 a.m., Hitler's motorcade pulled up to the Hanselbauer Hotel in Bad Wiessee, Bavaria. Inside, Ernst Röhm, the leader of Hitler's own paramilitary force, the SA, was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his oldest political ally had come to kill him. Röhm had been with Hitler since the early days. He commanded over 3 million brown-shirted storm troopers, 10 times larger than Germany's official army. But that was exactly the problem. Röhm had become too powerful, too independent, too dangerous. The SA wanted a second revolution to sweep away Germany's conservative establishment and install a true socialist state. Hitler, however, needed the support of big business and the military to consolidate his power. Röhm's radical agenda threatened everything. "Adolf, you're betraying our revolution," Röhm had shouted at Hitler in their final meeting. Within hours, those words had signed his death warrant. What followed was 48 hours of systematic murder. Hitler's elite SS units fanned out across Germany with assassination lists. Röhm was shot in his prison cell when he refused to commit suicide. SA leaders were dragged from their beds and executed on the spot. The purge had begun. But here's the secret historians discovered decades later. This wasn't just about the SA. Hitler used the night of the long knives to settle personal scores and eliminate political rivals who had nothing to do with Röhm's movement. General Kurt von Schleicher, a former chancellor who had opposed Hitler, was gunned down in his home along with his wife. Gustav Ritter von Kahr, who had crushed Hitler's beer hall putsch in 1923, was found beaten to death with pickaxes. Conservative politician Gregor Strasser, who had once competed with Hitler for Nazi party leadership, was shot in a Gestapo cell. Even some businessmen who had refused to support the Nazis found themselves on the death lists. Personal revenge disguised as political necessity. When the killing stopped, at least 200 people were dead, though the real number may have been much higher. Hitler appeared before the German parliament and declared, "In this hour, I was responsible for the fate of the German nation, and thereby I became the supreme judge of the German people." The message was crystal clear. Not even Hitler's oldest allies were safe if they opposed him. If he could murder the man who had stood beside him during the beer hall putsch, he could murder anyone. August 2nd, 1934, 9 a.m. as President Paul von Hindenburg, the 86-year-old war hero who had reluctantly appointed Hitler as chancellor, drew his final breath at his estate in East Prussia. Within hours, Hitler made an announcement that shocked even his own supporters. He was abolishing the office of president entirely. Instead, he would combine the powers of chancellor and president into a new position, Führer, leader of Germany. No elections, no constitutional process, no debate. Hitler simply declared himself the supreme authority of the German state. But Hitler's masterstroke wasn't the title change, it was what happened next. That same day, every officer and soldier in the German military was ordered to take a new oath. But this wasn't an oath to Germany or to the Constitution or to the German people. It was a personal oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler himself. "I swear by God this sacred oath. I will render unconditional obedience to the Führer of the German Reich and people." Adolf Hitler supreme commander of the Wehrmacht. Think about the genius of this move. Now, if Hitler ordered something illegal, immoral, or unconstitutional, German generals couldn't refuse. They had sworn a sacred oath. Breaking it would be treason, punishable by death. The oath ceremony took place across Germany simultaneously. In barracks, on ships, at airfields, millions of German soldiers raised their right hands and swore personal loyalty. Yep, to a man who had never served as an officer, had never attended military academy, and whose greatest military achievement was surviving as a corporal in World War I. Some generals privately expressed doubts. Field Marshal Werner von Blomberg reportedly told colleagues, "We've just sworn away our professional honor." But they took the oath anyway. The fear of Hitler's purges was still fresh in everyone's memory. President Hindenburg had been the last. Check on Hitler's power, the one man who could constitutionally remove him from office. With Hindenburg dead and the presidency abolished, Hitler had eliminated the final legal mechanism that could stop him. The Austrian corporal who had once been rejected from art school was now the unchallenged master of Europe's most powerful nation. While Hitler secured political and military power, his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels was waging a different kind of war. A war for the German mind. Goebbels understood something revolutionary. You don't need to force people to listen to propaganda if you make it impossible not to hear it. His first move was brilliant in its simplicity. Make radios cheap. The government subsidized the production of the Volksempfänger, the people's receiver, at just 35 Reichsmarks. It cost less than a week's wages for an average worker. Within 3 years, 70% of German households owned one. Every evening, millions of Germans sat in their living rooms, listening to the same speeches, the same news, the same carefully crafted version of reality. But Goebbels knew controlling adults wasn't enough. The real prize was Germany's children. Hitler Youth had existed since the 1920s. But after 1933, it exploded. By 1936, membership was essentially mandatory. Nearly every German child between 10 and 18 was enrolled. Over 5 million boys and girls, marching in uniform. On the surface, Hitler Youth looked harmless. Camping trips, sports competitions, community service. German parents saw their children learning discipline, fitness, patriotism, and they felt proud. But here's what was really happening. Every game was secretly military training. Capture the flag taught tactical maneuvers. Grenade ball prepared boys to throw actual grenades. Weekend camping trips, survival training exercises. Marching drills prepared them for real military formations. Boys as young as 10 were learning to read maps, to follow orders without question. To see violence as a tool, girls were taught their highest purpose was to produce racially pure children for the fatherland. And the most chilling part? These children were taught to report their own parents. If they heard anti-Nazi words at home, family loyalty was replaced with loyalty to the Führer. By 1936, Hitler Youth had become a state within a state, a parallel education system. It was producing a generation that had never known democracy, a generation that never learned to question authority. Goebbels had achieved something unprecedented in human history, the systematic indoctrination of an entire generation, and these children would become the soldiers, the officers, the bureaucrats, who would carry out Hitler's darkest plans without hesitation. While Hitler Youth trained tomorrow's soldiers, Hitler was secretly building the weapons they would use, and he was doing it right under Europe's nose. The Treaty of Versailles had been crystal clear. Germany was forbidden from having an air force, limited to 100,000 men, banned from producing tanks or submarines. For over a decade, Allied inspectors enforced these restrictions, but Hitler had been preparing for this moment. Since the 1920s, here's something most people don't know. Germany's Luftwaffe, its air force, didn't begin in Germany at all. It began in the Soviet Union. In the 1920s, Germany and the USSR struck a secret deal. German pilots trained at hidden airfields near Lipetsk. In Russia, German tank crews practiced maneuvers in the Soviet countryside. By the time Hitler came to power, Germany already had a secret generation of aviators, ready to build an air force. Now Hitler took it to the next level. Civilian factories were retrofitted overnight. A tractor factory could switch to producing tanks within weeks. Aircraft plants making passenger planes simply changed blueprints and started building bombers. The scale of deception was staggering. Sports clubs were actually training grounds for soldiers. Agricultural equipment factories, weapons plants, commercial aviation schools, fighter pilot academies. Between 1934 and 1935, Germany's official military budget jumped tenfold. Yet Hitler's government publicly proclaimed its commitment to peace. Foreign governments noticed the suspicious numbers, but convinced themselves it was just economic recovery. By 1935, Germany was producing weapons at a rate that should have terrified Europe. Messerschmitt was designing fighter planes that would dominate the skies. Krupp was building artillery that could flatten cities. U-boats were being constructed in civilian shipyards. In 1933, Germany had virtually no military aircraft. By 1936, they had over $5,000. The army, meant to be limited to 100,000 men, had secretly swelled to over 500,000, Europe suspected. Intelligence reports documented the violations, but they did nothing. Britain and France were exhausted from World War I, economically depressed. Desperate to believe Hitler's promises of peace, Hitler had turned Germany into a massive weapons factory, while convincing the world he was rebuilding his economy. It was perhaps his most successful deception, and it made World War II inevitable. January 13, 1935, the Saarland, rich in coal, stands at a crossroads. For 15 years, it's been under League of Nations control. Now its people must choose Germany, France, or foreign rule. Hitler needs this victory, desperately, coal and steel for his rearmament. But more than that, proof. Proof that Germans want his Reich. Goebbels unleashes propaganda, posters, radios, rallies. The message echoes, "Come home to Germany. Come home to strength. The vote is cast." The result, staggering. 98% choose Germany. Hitler celebrates. He calls it destiny. The world can see, he says, the German people want to be united under my leadership. To Europe, he sells peace. To history, he leaves questions. Was it truly free or forced? Nazi intimidation was everywhere. Opponents beaten, threatened, driven out. The brown shirts watched every ballot. Yet the League accepts the result. No questions asked. The Tsar returns to Germany. Coal and steel for Hitler's war machine. Confidence for his next gamble. It was manipulation at its finest. And Hitler had learned the lesson. Europe would accept expansion as long as he cloaked it in the words of democracy. March 16, 1935, Hitler steps before the cameras. He makes an announcement that should have been Europe's final warning. Germany is bringing back compulsory military service, a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. And this time, Hitler isn't even hiding it. He declares an army of 36 divisions, over 550,000 men. The treaty allowed only 100,000. Britain and France protest. The League condemns, and then silence. No sanctions, no response, no consequences. Hitler has called Europe's bluff, and he's won. He rips up the treaty that was meant to prevent another German threat. The world watches, and does nothing. But while he builds his army in public, in the shadows, he builds something darker. A legal weapon. A system of racial persecution. September 15, 1935, the Nazi Party rally at Nuremberg. Before thousands of cheering supporters, Hitler announces the Nuremberg Laws. Laws that strip German Jews of citizenship, of rights, of humanity. The Reich Citizenship Law declares only people of German blood can be citizens. Jews are reduced to subjects of the state. Second class without political rights. The law for the protection of German blood and honor bans marriage between Jews and non-Jews. With these laws, anti-Semitism becomes official German policy. Jews can't vote, can't hold office, can't claim citizenship. Germany's greatest Jewish scientists see the danger. Einstein has already fled. Now physicists, chemists, mathematicians, engineers, all leaving. Many of them will help the Allies. On radar, on the Manhattan Project, Germany's loss becomes the Allies' gain. The racism Hitler thought would make Germany strong is driving away its brightest minds. By the end of 1935, Hitler has achieved two things. He has rearmed Germany, and he has gotten away with it. He has learned a dangerous lesson. Europe's fear of war is stronger than its will to enforce peace. March 7, 1936 noon, a calm Saturday in Europe. While families enjoyed their weekend, 32,000 German soldiers marched into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone, a forbidden zone. This was Hitler's riskiest gamble yet. The Rhineland had been off-limits since Versailles, a buffer meant to protect France and Belgium. But even Hitler's own generals thought this move was madness. General Ludwig Beck opposed it. Field Marshal von Blomberg barely slept the night before. They all knew the truth. If France acted, Germany would have to retreat. Hitler later admitted, "The 48 hours after the march were the most nerve-wracking of my life. So why risk it?" Because Hitler knew something his generals didn't. Europe feared war. As German troops crossed the bridges, Hitler waited in Berlin. His hands shook. Cigarette after cigarette. France held emergency meetings. Their military was ready. They could have crushed Germany in days. But politicians hesitated. They asked Britain for support. Britain said, "Don't overreact. They're only in their own territory." 3 days passed, then a week, then a month. France did nothing. Britain did nothing. The League condemned and moved on. Hitler's impossible gamble had worked. The Rhineland was gone as a barrier, and not a single shot was fired. The impact was huge. Hitler's confidence soared. His generals now saw him as a genius. The German people cheered him as the man who restored pride without war. But the real impact was on Europe. France and Britain had just proven they would not fight to enforce the peace treaties. Hitler learned the most dangerous lesson of all: push hard enough, and the democracies will back down. Years later, Churchill called this moment the last chance to stop Hitler without a major war. If France had acted, if even a small force had entered the Rhineland, Hitler's government might have collapsed. But Europe blinked first, and Hitler never forgot it. By 1936, the transformation was complete. In just 3 years, Hitler had turned Germany from a fragile democracy into a powerful dictatorship armed for war. He had used a fire to gain emergency powers. He had used those powers to eliminate every political opponent. He had murdered his own allies. When they became inconvenient, he had indoctrinated an entire generation of children. He had secretly built a massive military machine, and he had tested Europe's willingness to stop him, and found nothing but weakness. Every red flag had been raised. Every warning sign had been visible. The Reichstag fire, the enabling act, the night of the long knives, the Nuremberg laws, the rearmament, the Rhineland. At each step, Europe had a choice: confront Hitler now or hope he would be satisfied. At each step, they chose hope over action. And at each step, Hitler grew bolder. The most haunting part of this story isn't what Hitler did. It's what Europe didn't do. They had the military power to stop him. They had the legal justification through violated treaties. They had multiple moments when Hitler himself admitted he would have backed down if challenged, but they were tired. They were divided. They were desperate to believe that peace could be maintained through compromise and appeasement. They convinced themselves that each violation was the last one, that each aggressive act would satisfy Hitler's ambitions. They were wrong. By 1936, Hitler had learned the most dangerous lesson in history. Democracies will sacrifice principle to avoid conflict, and he was about to use that lesson to tear Europe apart. The secret years were over. The hidden transformation was complete. What came next would be visible to the entire world: international aggression, territorial conquest, and the march toward inevitable war. Spain would burn in civil war, with Hitler's Luftwaffe testing its weapons on Spanish cities. Austria would be absorbed in a bloodless invasion. Czechoslovakia would be carved up piece by piece while Europe watched. And with each success, Hitler's appetite would grow. In Part 4, we'll see how every act of appeasement became a green light for Hitler's next move, how Britain and France's desperate attempts to maintain peace actually guaranteed war, and how the world's failure to act in these secret years would cost 50 million lives. The prisoner had become a dictator. The dictator was about to become a conqueror, and Europe's last chances to stop him had already passed.